Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this morning's meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. We'll make a start. This meeting is being broadcast on the webcast, live to the public. For those not able to watch the footage live, the webcast will be available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. Can I just remind everyone that when you speak, please switch your microphone on, and when you finish, make sure you turn it off. We've got two substitutions. Mr. Bolter is here in place of Mr. Charlesworth, and Mrs. Richards is here in place of Mrs. Fryer. Okay. Two main items on the agenda today, but we'll go through the formalities first. Minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of March. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of March are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Are you all in agreement? Thank you. Item 2, I have no questions, nor do we have any questions submitted by members under Standing Order 7.3 or 7.5. I have no urgent items to take under item 4 today. And then under item 5, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Do you wish to declare any interests?
The usual.
Do we need the usual? I don't think there's anything particular double-hatted members need to be concerned about on the agenda.
The council names in one of the reports, so it's probably sensible.
Okay,
Yeah.
We'll take a blanket. Double-hatted. Any other declarations? Any declarations of the party whip? No. Item 7, presentation of petitions. I've not received any petitions. So that takes us to item 8 then, which is place marketing, strategic tourism and inward investment. The officers would like to come up. And we've got Tom Pennell, Assistant Chief Executive, Louise Driver, the Team Leader, Economic Growth, and Mark Oakley, Director of Inward Investment and Place Marketing. Now, do you want to say anything before we have the presentation, Tom?
I can just quickly summarise what's in the cover report for you, if you'd like. I mean, that report provides an update on recent developments in relation to the place marketing service. Mark's the director of that service, based at the City Council, but jointly funded by the City and County. Louise leads the County Council's input to the service from County Hall. The Commission has previously received updates on place marketing, and particularly at the time of the review that was held in 2016 and in the following period. Just to recap briefly, that review in 2016 led to a decision by the Cabinet and by the City Mayor to establish a company to be jointly owned by the two councils to lead on place marketing, strategic tourism and inward investment. Detailed arrangements were agreed in the summer of 2017. We put in place shadow interim staffing arrangements while the company was being established, but we did hit a number of problems in establishing the company, particularly around IT licenses, which were going to be costly to resolve. And also the interim arrangements were working well. There was good private sector engagement. So as a result of that, this February, Cabinet agreed to shelve, at least for the time being, the establishment of a company and to extend the current working arrangements. And those are described in paragraphs 9 to 12. Paragraph 11 refers to the development of a formal joint working agreement between the two councils, the development of a 3-year business plan, and that being supported by budgets provided by both of the councils. The budget aspects are summarised in paragraphs 13 to 15. So you will recall that there was a savings requirement linked to economic growth and the place marketing budget back at the time of the review. So some of those savings have been secured, around about £100,000, but there has been less than anticipated income generated, and there's been some adjustments to the budget, so some of the savings aren't now going to be made. Some additional funding has been found. So we do have a budget for 2019-2020 of £155,000 from the County Council. I think it's worth noting that previously we had a bigger budget than that, pretty much all of which was spent on tourism. The amount spent on tourism has been pulled back, but that's been compensated for by some additional funding for inward investment activity. And the County Council's budget sits alongside funding from the City Council of £390,000. I suspect what you'll be particularly interested in is what's being delivered, what the current activities are, what the future plans are. So on that point, I'll hand over to Mark to give his presentation.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Tom. As Tom introduced me, I'm the Director of Inward Investment and Place Marketing that covers Leicester and Leicestershire. I've joined the Leicester City Council as a direct employee about 10 months ago and lead the delivery of the place marketing team. What I'm looking to do in terms of the presentation is to give you an overview of the service, the key actions that we're engaged in and where we're looking to take the service going forward. The way that we work is very much working in partnership, and that's with the public and also the private sector. And the private sector being particularly key because this is effectively an economic development initiative. There are some core functions that the team get involved in. The three primarily being inward investment, so that's attracting business into the area, and that's Leicester and Leicestershire. Place marketing, so that's about raising the profile of the area. And strategic tourism, and that's very much working with our tourism providers, the attractions and accommodation, to try to make sure that we've got a stronger offer. When it comes to partnership working, we have a framework for delivery, and the slide for the framework is above me. What it does is it identifies on the top right some advisory bodies that we work with. We've established a tourism advisory board that's been established now for over a year that Sally Coleman in the team leads on in terms of officer support, but it's very much a private sector led group that involves key hotels, attractions, trying to look at the key activities that we are delivering going forward, and I'll be talking about that shortly. The second advisory body is the Strategic Marketing Group, and that's very much about how we work better together to get a unified message across to try to promote the area. And the third one is very much about business ambassadors. Those three groups then feed into and advise and support the work of the Strategic Marketing Group that's on the left. Tom Pennell and Louise Driver sit on that group alongside one of the directors for Leicester City Council and myself, and we obviously take steerage from the political leadership. In terms of the team itself, the team very much focuses on tourism, place marketing, inward investment. I'm going to talk about that shortly. So in terms of the actual team itself, it's a small team. We have 7 currently in the team, and I've listed here the officers that are involved in driving the activity forward. The place marketing function is very much a function that supports both inward investment and strategic tourism. Sally Coleman in the room today, Sally is a secondee from the County Council that works very, very closely within the team, trying to develop and bring forward strategic tourism. From the inward investment side, we have a small team, and what's happening actually today, a bit later today, is we've got interviews for a inward investment post that will be a part of the Leicestershire County Council team from the economic growth team, but seconded over to develop and support some of the activities that we're leading in terms of inward investment. Moving on to the first focus area, inward investment. In terms of the inward investment toolkit, the team run a property and site search facility. What we do is we work very closely with commercial property agents and developers, and try to have as best a listing of sites that are available potentially for businesses that may be thinking about locating in the area or relocating and growing within the area. That facility itself, in the last year alone, we had 385 inquiries through that process. A lot of them are web-based, but then we handhold probably about 20 or 25% of the inquiries that may come through from a direct telephone call or an email that comes through to the team. We work very closely with our business ambassadors, and those are the businesses within Leicester and Leicestershire that are keen to help us to showcase Leicester's offer. What we're doing at the moment is we're trying to better shape that group, working with Louise Driver in terms of making sure that it's a good cross-section of the key sectors that we're trying to grow, but also those people that have got a passion to try to better promote Leicester and Leicestershire. And recently we've won a Financial Times Foreign Direct Investment Award for that Business Ambassador Programme. So we're very, very pleased with how that's going at the moment, but keen to develop it. One of the things that we have recently developed is a sites map, and I'll talk about that shortly. I've got copies for you as well here if you're interested in seeing what that is about. I'll show you in a second. We work very closely with something called Team Leicester, and Team Leicester is effectively a public-private sector grouping of people led by businesses that are very keen to showcase what's good about Leicester, particularly from their business perspective. It involves a number of solicitors, construction companies, property developers, a range of different people. And as part of Team Leicester, we arranged a trip to the MIPIM Property Conference in March as a delegation as part of the Midlands Engine. That was, I believe, a very successful visit, and we've had a lot of work that we're still working through at the moment in terms of the leads that have been generated and developed through that. What we're planning to do at the moment is that in May-June time, we're due to have a follow-up session inviting both the leader of the County Council and also the City Mayor to attend and engage. So we're keen to try and to make sure that we've got ongoing dialogue with people in the property development profession, because it isn't just about one event, it's about spreading it throughout the whole of the year. We work quite closely with the districts and the enterprise zones. In fact, the visit to MIPIM involved John Bennett, who's the head of strategic property at Leicestershire County Council, and also Cheryl Maguire from the LEP, who's our enterprise zone coordinator. So we're very much trying to get the offer out there as best we can. One of the examples of working with districts is that we've recently helped support and launch the Invest in Harborough event that was probably about 4 or 5 weeks ago, which was a very successful event actually. We're developing our approach to better promoting the business profile through social media, and we're due to be going live shortly with something called the Invest in Leicester LinkedIn page. And what we're keen to do is to try to connect up to businesses within the Leicester and Leicestershire area that are interested in finding out what is happening and how we can actually develop businesses to come forward, and then try to promote that and better promote the opportunities as we bring them forward. One of the things that Tom referred to previously was about the ERDF, or European Inward Investment website, funded website. We're developing a new website to try to attract better quality investment into the area, specifically focusing on some key sectors. But that will also be about having better images and video content, so we're able to compete as best we can with other areas, certainly within the UK and worldwide too. We work very closely with the Department for International Trade, and they are effectively the body within the UK that are tasked with trying to attract investment into the UK, and we effectively feed into a lot of these things called propositions, and the propositions may be sectoral focus, and it's the way that the government actually tries to attract investment into the area. We saw an opportunity at the end of last year in terms of trying to identify and develop a space prospectus. We were successful in a bid to Department for International Trade, and now we're working with them to finalise something called a high potential opportunity. And what that is it's effectively a proposition that can be used worldwide by the Department for International Trade to promote not only the space sector but Leicester and Leicestershire as part and parcel of that. I referred earlier to the interviews for the County Council funded secondment that will really boost the investment focus, and hopefully we'll find someone suitable later today. Oops. This slide tries to give you a flavour for some of the key activity that the team are involved in trying to support investment into the area. We engage quite regularly with putting in place visits for businesses that may be considering the location. We'll provide them with information about the sites and the opportunities. We'll work with the Leicestershire, I think it's Leicestershire Employment Hub, because they can give us a really good flavour for staffing availability, skills base, so we can actually try to match businesses with the local labour supply. We'll connect up with the universities, the 3 universities, and also as part of our Business Ambassador programme, we better engage interested parties to talk to businesses that are already being successful within the local area, because they are keen to promote it and develop those contacts as well. This is the sites map that I referred to earlier. I've got copies here if people are interested. This was a piece of work that was only just recently completed. It was completed middle of March. And effectively what it is a listing of the key major employment, investment opportunities, development opportunities within Leicester and Leicestershire, for businesses that are potentially interested in locating, but also for those that are keen to better understand the market. This was a really interesting, difficult piece of work to piece together, because it was very much working with the county, the districts in terms of what the offers were, but then also the agents and developers that were leading on those sites. And we're keen to get that promoted as best we can. One of the key benefits of working in the way that we did was actually by working directly with the agents and developers, we're able to better communicate to them the offer and support that we can put in place when they're working with businesses as well. So that's the inward investment side. The next area that I'm going to talk about briefly is place marketing, and this is the sort of the second core activity within the team. So place marketing itself supports the activity of inward investment, but also the strategic tourism side. What we are working on at the moment is very much trying to develop some of the key messages. The reason why key messages are important is because we need to make sure that both the private and public sector are saying effectively the same type of thing when they're communicating out about the offer, the opportunities, and certainly the significant progress the area is making economically. So what we do is we work out effective campaigns. We've got a PR consultancy that's recently been engaged called Storycoms, and we're developing up a plan of action with them at the moment that, working with Louise, we're trying to shape that as best we can to try to make sure that we are promoting the area effectively. The team itself also manage the websites. We've got a number of different websites that are particularly high profile, certainly in terms of the visitor economy and the inward investment side, but you can always improve those and make those better. We produce a guide called the Welcome to Leicestershire Guide, and that goes into some of the, well, most of the bigger hotels within Leicester and Leicestershire region. So that's really trying to promote the area and make sure that those people that do come and stay, because it's found in bedrooms, actually better understand what attractions there are and why they ought to come out and see them better. One of the things that we've recently established is a strategic marketing group, and I'll talk about that in a second. And that group itself, we had the first meeting in March, and one of the key objectives of that group is very much making sure that those organisations that do have spend in terms of promoting, raising the profile of the area, have a unified approach in some way, so that when we're saying what's good and what's great about Leicester and Leicestershire, we're all saying effectively the same thing, so we're communicating effectively. The first meeting was a very interesting meeting because a number of the people in the room didn't know each other, because they're very much focused on their core areas of their own organisations. And what we're seeing now at the moment is seeing the opportunity to better coordinate how that might work going forward longer term. The third area of core activity is focusing very much on strategic tourism. As Tom referred earlier, we established the Tourism Advisory Board some time ago, I think it's September 2017, and we have a private sector-led chair, Sharon Redrobe, who runs the Twycross Sea. At the moment, there are some core activities that group are looking at and driving forward. One of them is about developing a tourism growth plan. Sally Coleman in the team has been working very closely with the tourist attractions and accommodation providers to identify some of their growth ambitions so we can better understand what it is that those businesses want to try to do going forward. What we're doing is then trying to build in understanding of where individual areas are looking to go in terms of, say, destination management plans, the tourism blueprint that Charnwood developing, and then also the city council's work in terms of the refresh of the tourism action plan. And using the STEAM data that we commissioned to try to better evidence base where we've been and try to help us better understand where we may be going in terms of statistics. Another key area that we're looking to develop and explore, and it's something that will be considered at the Tourist Advisory Board on the 12th of April, is how we may be able to introduce a better way of trying to support business tourism. That's when people come to hotels or to conference facilities to have a business event. Typically, a business tourism visitor spends approximately 4 times that of a leisure visitor, so it's got a good impact for the economy, and we're exploring how best we may be able to put together a package that works with those people that have got conference facilities to best put in place a mechanism that supports them to have those spaces filled as best possible. We held a stakeholder workshop on the 27th of March to gain their views. It's likely to come forward as a sort of membership model where they have to pay some element of a fee to benefit from the activities that may be coming forward. But that's something we're shaping at the moment. Another thing that we do quite closely is work closely with the district tourism partnerships, and that's something that Sally specifically does, and also champion the Leicester and Leicestershire area with Visit England and Visit Britain and the Midlands Engine. And only this week we've been announced as a destination management organisation through Visit Britain, so that's really good news that we're progressing with that at this point. One area that we have been working quite hard at as part of the Tourist Advisory Board is we established a tourism task and finish group to look at whether or not there would be a buy-in from the private sector, particularly, to developing a tourism brand concept. And we were very keen to try to make it so that there was something that joined the attractions and the hotels in some manner of way as a distinctive overarching theme that they could buy into. The task group that was led by a number of the private sector, they came forward very much with a overarching theme. So it's a public-private discussion, but it was very much about trying to come forward with something called Uncover the Story, and it was viewed that that may be a really good tourism brand for us to develop and come forward with. And what we're doing at the moment is looking at how that may work in practice, potentially with development of a toolkit that helps businesses that are in that sector buy into it. They're the 3 key areas, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. Right, anything else to add, Tom, before we take questions? Okay, right, over to members then. Who would like to... Terry?
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask through you, so I get some sort of flavour, so what targets have you got? What have you achieved so far? So you mentioned MIPIM, for instance, saying it was successful. So what has directly come out of the team going to MIPIM? What have we actually got out of it? What concrete has happened? So I would have expected in the presentation to see some sort of idea of the business case, what the targets are, what you're going to achieve by when, but there didn't seem to be anything in there to get my teeth into.
Okay. In terms of MIPIM, as an event, I think the difficulty with that is it's about starting dialogue largely. So the way that we have considered the MIPIM process is really very much about showcasing and whether or not that was effectively done. We engaged very much with the private sector, so it wasn't just about the public sector, it was very much Team Leicester as a company and the sponsors that were part and parcel of that visit. We've had very good anecdotal evidence that that was a success. On the 11th, so tomorrow, I've got a meeting with Midlands Engine because effectively we work across the Midlands UK area and are currently reviewing whether or not that is something that the Department for International Trade want to support in the future. So we're still shaping, it's still quite early days in terms of the outcomes of any of those negotiations or discussions that we had actually at the event. But the initial feedback is it was positive. In terms of the overall targets of the team, as part of the joint working arrangement that we're shaping up with Louise at the moment, that's what will be built within there.
It was just that I suppose perhaps we come back to start. So there is some sort of mission statement. So what are you setting out to achieve? So when we set this up, there must be an idea of what we seek to achieve by when, what the drivers are. I mean, you know, with all due respect, it's easy to say anecdotal evidence is good. Anecdotal evidence from who about what? So to me, anecdotal is great. What have we done concrete? So what have we actually attracted? How many businesses have we so far attracted? How much inward investment have we actually garnered? And those sort of things is what I'm really interested in.
Okay. As you'll appreciate, in terms of investment, there's a journey that businesses go on from the initial contact to the build-out of a development. We're currently hand-holding a number of businesses in terms of their investment requirements, ranging from small one-man, two-man bands looking for new office space up to the biggest at the moment is an 85-acre requirement from an automotive manufacturer that's interested in the Midlands area. So that gives you a range, a scale in terms of the scale of the businesses that we're supporting. There are a number of businesses that we have been working with that are food processing manufacturers that are looking to grow and are struggling to find space to allow them to grow. There are ones that we have been supporting. We've helped over the past year a company called Octopus Energy, U Energy, PPL, PRS. There's a number of different businesses that we've supported over the past year to actually invest or grow their existing business.
Okay. Who else we got? Alan.
Just slightly different tack. Just a few points. I think yesterday it was reported East Midlands, obviously aware footfall in the East Midlands, particularly in business, is some of the worst in the country. So it's quite shocking as well, the amount of shops, stores that are being closed. So that will affect any tourism or internal investment. We still have the issue of the online marketing, how we work with that, and the online, again, it's affected what we do in Melton with the footfall. A lot of people are buying online, so that changes the business model and internal investment, the type of companies that would do business slightly different, and I'm just wondering how we're managing that. We've seen a situation with Debenhams, a big company like that, is going into receivership, which is a bit of a worry. And the other thing that really concerns me at the moment is, and we need to acknowledge it, is robotics, how that impacts on local employment. It is impacting. A lot of people now using different systems. I don't go to McDonald's, but when I go for a coffee, no longer do they have the 17, 18-year-old first job. Now you press a button and it's, instead of 3 people being employed, it's 1. And I know there's other industries. So the whole issue about investment, etc., concerns me, because the system's changing, and it's, I guess when we look at the mix we're trying to get in Leicestershire and Leicester, is that we actually ensure that what we get involved with is long term, not short term, that we're actually looking at the future, that we can actually keep the investment going and make sure that we meet the market needs. Okay.
I think the question of footfalls within town centres or city centres as well is a challenging one, and the real challenge for us is to try to bring distinctiveness and work out how best to attract footfall into town centres. My team don't specifically get involved in town centres. It's more working with industrial bases and office, less so retail sector. So I'm probably not the right person to ask that specific question. In terms of the change of dynamics of industry, some of the jobs that are being created within some of the logistics sector that are advanced logistics are actually quite high skilled, but maybe not as many job numbers per acre as we'd perhaps like. Well, I'm working with a company at the moment that is thinking about Leicester and Leicestershire. It's a fulfilment centre, and when you talk through the detail of what that company actually does, the quality of those jobs is actually quite high spec. When we look at certainly the Leicester City area, we've got a number of businesses that are keen to grow within the office arena there because they're linking in with the supply of graduates coming through from the universities. It is a challenging environment, and what we try to do is be as flexible as we can in terms of how and who we can support as best we can.
Yeah, that's fine. I understand that. I'm still trying to get to the point, as you've said there, that there's different industries, and where I'm based, in a town where we are the centre of food, the high-skilled jobs are very rare, and therefore they're low-paying jobs. We compare that market force to Harborough, where the jobs are higher tech. There's more spend there than we have in my area. So that it's very important that we do look at the sort of type of work and how we impact it. But surely also we have to look at the mix, because if we bring industry in that's going to impact on footfall, if we're going to have companies that are going to produce and do work with robotics, we have to carefully. We don't want the cat in the chicken house, do we? If you know what I mean. So we have to be very careful at selecting what sort of industry that we have, so it works with Leicester, not against what we're trying to achieve.
Perhaps just come in on that. I think as well as the work of the place marketing team, which is clearly relevant to this agenda, I think also the work of the LEP and the partners within the LEP in developing, for example, a local industrial strategy, which will be looking at how we can strengthen a number of key sectors within the county to support growth, within the city and the wider county, including market towns. And I think also there are other funding streams that will be looked at perhaps more by the LEP and by the district councils and the county councils rather than by the place marketing team. I'm thinking of, for example, the Future High Streets Fund, where there's funding available to support improvements to town high streets. So we'll be looking at those from a LEP perspective as well as from a place marketing perspective.
Yeah, just remind us on the industrial strategy, because is that still slipping?
There's now a firm timetable for that to be delivered. So the intention, from recollection, is that there will be a draft local industrial strategy submitted to government in October. And between now and then, there's going to be engagement activity. At the moment, a lot of work is being done pulling together the evidence base for that. So there's a process now of engaging with partners on that evidence and on what the priorities should be, shaping those priorities, and then coming forward with the draft LIS. And also we've got a session lined up for scrutiny in June to look at the emerging work on the LIS. Louise has just reminded me.
Thanks for that. Yep, we'll put you down. Terry Einan next. Oh, sorry, no, Kevin Felton. Then Terry.
Thank you, Chairman. Couple of things. And actually, just what Tom's just said confuses me even more, because I thought part of this whole idea was to sort of bring together everything into a sort of a investment, tourism, etc. So the LEP obviously is a different issue. But two things. One, don't really see how the districts are involved, because you'd have thought that's another source of funding. And I'd appreciate the harbour one, because I knew about that. And then I was interested in the map you've got, and you showed a bit of it on there, because clearly, and it's always the same for whatever we show, the east of the county is invariably got very little things happening. And therefore, Melton down to Harborough, and it's happening again. I can see why, but somehow I think we ought to have some kind of deep rural investment. There are people who are interested in it. We do have industries there. And in fact, in my own village, actually, interesting, it wasn't on the map. There's several hectares of land being made available with planning permission for a business park. And I was surprised it wasn't on there, because you'd think Harborough would let you know that it's available, but maybe there's a certain level, I don't know. But just interested, how to involve more.
Okay. Just in response to that, the map that we've produced is quite tight in terms of the number that we could effectively have within that. But what we have also got as part of the work that we've done with the districts and the agents, also got a list of those that aren't quite as big a site. So that, because when we're working with the businesses, we want to give as best an opportunity as we can. So these are sort of the bigger ones. But we've got also the information we've got on the smaller ones, and what we're looking to do as part of the work that we're doing with the website and the development of the toolkit as we put it together is actually bring those a bit more to the fore as well. But they are also included within the database that is searchable online at the moment. So hopefully you've picked up on the site that you're referring to.
Okay, Terry Inan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that interesting report. I want to share Alan Pearson's concerns about attracting the right kind of industry. We've got problems in North West Leicestershire, where I have a division, where I think we've got something like 6,000 jobs going in up near the airport, and you go to the jobs fairs, which are put on by my district council, and the employers are looking like people that are they're desperate, they're looking around where are these employees, so that's an issue. I can see, I guess, what your overall aim is, I think inward investment, yes. Footfall is interesting. I was interested that the Leicester bid is part of your discussions in place marketing. We haven't got a bid in Colville, but I was interested that Hinckley bid seemed to be quite active, and I'm wondering, are you going to move out into the other bids? And then coming back to my own patch, we've got quite a lot of derelict land sitting in Colville that is supposed to be for retail, privately owned. And so then my substantive question really, what are the barriers to attracting the right kind of inward investment?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. It's a hard question to answer, certainly the last one. If I look at it from been in post for 10 months, and the inquiries that we're having and some of the challenges that the businesses are facing that we've evidenced through working with them, we've got a number of companies that are keen to grow space, but they're struggling to find the right level or size of site. They're particularly keen where they can to have freehold. Developers want to, or less keen to do that. There's quite a large requirement in terms of A grade office space, particularly around the city of Leicester area. We've got a number of businesses that are looking for food grade space. So they're in the food industry, they're struggling to find that grow on space for them. When it comes to a number of the companies that I've been working with, one of the reasons why they are thinking about Leicester and Leicestershire as an area is because in the areas that they're currently operating, they are struggling to recruit. And through the work that we do with the Leicester Employment Hub, we've been trying to give them a better confidence in terms of the availability of the skills and the type of person that they're looking for to recruit, and also their availability and the level of wage rates that they'd be expected to pay as well to meet the market. So those are some of the key challenges that I think are being faced by certainly businesses that are looking to come into the area. There's a core drive of naturally in terms of industrial on the M1, but some of those businesses that are looking to grow particularly are keen to grow as close to their existing base, and that does prove challenging for them.
Leicester Employment Hub, does that just deal with the issue in the city, or does it cover who runs that?
The Leicester Employment Hub is a function that is, I believe, funded through partly from the LEP, but the team there will basically put us. When I have a investor that's interested, I'll bring them to the table because they're very closely connected with all the employment support agencies that are out there. So we're able to say, well, this is the offer that is currently available, and how we'll be able to engage with you should you make a decision to invest in the local area.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things. One, I'll pick up on the bid in a second, but just on the employment hub, that is city and county wide. It's funded through European Regional Development funding, and we do have an officer that sits on the governance board of that. The other thing to mention around skills as well is that the government have announced that they're going to have skills advisory panels within each area. So the Leicester and Leicestershire Enterprise Partnership is going to be establishing a skills advisory panel. And Caroline Boucher from our Business Intelligence Unit, who's got obviously a history of working in skills and employment, will be sitting on that. And one of the things that we're pushing for is that we very quickly develop a skills and employment strategy for Leicester and Leicestershire, which will underpin some of the work that's happening around the local industrial strategy, but also underpin some of the work that Mark's doing as well in terms of inward investment. So it really will be about matching the kind of future demands around the emerging skills that we have. Around HS2, for example, there's a skills and employment strategy within the East Midlands region, and Leicestershire County Council has volunteered to lead on the Inspiring Young People element of that. And we do actually see that as being broader than HS2. So although it's under the banner of HS2, that is bringing together universities, colleges, Chamber of Commerce, local authorities from Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire and Leicestershire, and in fact Lincolnshire, to talk about how we can meet some of those kind of cross-border skills challenges that we're going to have, particularly around North West Leicestershire. The other thing on business improvement districts, as Mark said, I think at the moment we're working really well with our districts on both the inward investment angle, but also on the strategic tourism angle. We've got some really good relationships built with them, and we've got networks that we report into, like the District Economic Development Officers Group. But we also do, as you know, we've got Helen Harris in my team that works very closely with the market towns. She works, leads coordination of the market towns steering group, and through that they work very closely with the business improvement districts. So they are kind of, whilst at the moment they don't have a place at the strategic marketing group per se, we are going to be looking at how we work closely with them to make sure that we're encompassing their messages as well.
Thank you. Most of my questions, thank you very much, you have just answered, because I was extremely keen to ask you how do you ensure a fair geographical spread and working via districts, that is, I assume. But then my question goes back to Terry's previous. He said, is there a business plan? And so how do we actually measure outcomes? Because yes, you can go and meet with a district, but what are the outcomes? How do we measure it? Because at the end of the day, I do appreciate that we've got to work smarter and more professional, but our shareholders are still our ratepayers who are paying all our wages. So how do we actually ensure those ratepayers that, you know, we are doing the best for them? So again, yeah, how do you measure outcomes, tangible outcomes? And my other question, it is, as I've just said, we are our shareholders are the ratepayers and members are their representatives. So all through these processes, while they're very professional, and I appreciate that, but where is the members' input? Because at the end of the day, you know, we have to have some members' input to bring up the grassroots levels to the top, because how will you, or how will Mark Oakley ever know what somebody needs in probably a small rural village if, you know, so how do we get that engagement as well?
On the performance, I think Mark's covered some of that. What I would say in addition to that is, I mean, historically we've used Steam data as a measure of performance around tourism, and we'll continue to do that. So we're continuing to invest in Steam data. But also some of the work that we're doing around developing a tourism growth plan and a business tourism strategy, which we will bring back to scrutiny once we've got a draft form of that. Within that, there will be performance measures that we're working towards. And that strategy, that's not going to be a city and county council strategy. That needs to be a partnership strategy. It needs to be a public, private, district strategy, because we're only going to deliver this collectively with all of us together. So hopefully, when we bring that back to you, you will be able to see how we're going to be measuring those outputs and those outcomes. In terms of, I think your other question was around geographical spread and member involvement as well. It's interesting, actually. We had Deputy Director from Rural, from DEFRA, come up to visit the Leicestershire Rural Partnership on Monday, and we actually hosted it out at Melton Borough Council. We had Pranali, their new Director of Growth, presenting around the food manufacturing zone and the opportunities that we have around Melton. We went out to view the cattle market. We went to view a really amazing little brewery on the cattle market, which has got young enterprise. And we also went to see farm diversification around ice cream. So that was about promoting the broader geographical offer. We had a presentation from the National Forest Company as well around the work that they're doing, particularly around promoting tourism. And Sally's been doing a huge amount of work with Visit Britain. One project that they've been working on is a Discover England Fund programme, which is Midlands wide. That's led by West Midlands Growth Company. But we've been leading on the cycling strand of that, and we've now developed. Got one here. There are developed some nice brochures. This one's particularly focused around the National Forest, which is 7-day and short stay breaks. And these are being promoted around Europe at investment and tourism shows around Europe. So I think some really positive work being done around developing that geographical approach. In terms of member involvement, obviously areas like Leicestershire Rural Partnership do play a key role with that. You know, our own bringing documents, you know, bringing presentations here to scrutiny and to cabinet involved in that. But obviously, if ever we're doing anything on anyone's patch as well, then we would seek to involve them.
If I may come back, Chair, I think that's absolutely wonderful, but I think there is a lack in communication then, because what is your communication strategy to get it out into the wider aspect? Now, I'm a very hands-on councillor and I try to read everything, but a lot of the things you've just told me, you know, and I see lots of nods, all of us don't know. So how can we feed that back into our, you know, so there's a communication strategy. And before I finish, can I also have a breakdown on, you talked about geographical spread on tourism, wonderful. Now I also like to have an explanation on geographical spread on inward investment, if I can, please. So.
In terms of the geographical spread of the inward investment, I'll perhaps ask Mark to come back on that. I was just going to come back to your earlier point, but it's slipped my mind what that was now. It's about communication, that's right, yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a really helpful really helpful comment, because I think it's important that we do make sure that members are aware of the activity that's being undertaken. And it would be slightly ironic if an organisation that's focused on marketing isn't marketing its work effectively to key stakeholders, and members are clearly, really key stakeholders. So we'll absolutely look at how we can use the member alert system within the council for making sure that you're all aware of what's happening, but perhaps also have a think about how other local communities can be kept up to speed with what's happening.
Okay, Bill Bolton.
Hang on. In fair geographical spread on inward investment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I think the honest answer to that is we are guided by where the businesses want to be. We effectively promote Leicester and Leicestershire as an offer. We try to have as best knowledge and understanding as we can in terms of sites, properties that are available and the support that is available within those areas. But we are very much guided by where those businesses see as potentially they would like to be. We try to open that up as wide as we can, but we are just guided by the businesses.
If I'm just being a nuisance. Now, for instance, abroad, what an inward investment company would do is they would actually go out to affairs, exhibitions, to actually sell their areas. Do you do that sort of thing? Rather than coming to you, you go out and say, whoopee-doo, here is Leicestershire, and we can offer that. So do you sell yourself rather than waiting for the people to come to you?
There's a multi-pronged approach that we have. As I spoke earlier, I mentioned the MIPIM event. That is us going proactively out to the World's International Property Conference to raise awareness of Leicester and Leicestershire as a place to invest. And the way that we work through that, we took a delegation of around 25 companies from Leicestershire, where we worked together with rather than take, I guess. But that was very much about showcasing the opportunities and the support that's available. So that is a clear example of what we're doing. The challenge with that is very much trying to make sure that we get real outcomes from that time and effort that we put in place to actually doing that. The sites map that we produced was produced specifically to time in with us going to that event to raise the awareness of the sites and opportunities that we've got. But as I said earlier, it's not about a one point in time. It's about making sure that we've got the right mechanisms to communicate the offer across the year throughout. And that's why we're developing and supporting our website. We're looking better at social media and how we can communicate it and get the businesses to help us to communicate it. So it's a multi-pronged approach.
Bill Bolton.
Thank you. An interesting show. But to me, it raises more questions than answers. Looking at the report before me, now, forgive me, I'm new boy to this Scrutiny Commission. It's only my third meeting. However, looking at the papers before us, you failed to meet the target that was set to you for the funding. There's an extra £50,000 going in this year, plus another £30,000 with ongoing money going into it. I don't know how much we're now giving to Leicestershire Promotions, but over the page on page 14, item 20, it mentions Leicestershire Promotions there as well. There seems an awful lot of bodies trying to do the same thing. And I thought the County Council was trying to coordinate things into one body for tourism and all the rest of it. But instead of that, we seem to be spreading out even further with no, and as Terry says, with no targets, nothing we can measure to see how successful you're being. I'd like to support you, but I'd like to know what I'm getting for the money that we're paying out. And as Rosita says, we're responsible for the taxpayers' money that's going into these schemes. We need to know how much money is being spent on what. I don't know what's being given to Leicester Promotions now from the county. I do remember some money being reduced on that some time ago, but we're still putting money into it. So what's the difference between what they're doing and what you're trying to achieve? And that's the question to Tom, really. to me, looking at the papers before us, you've got quite a big board, quite a lot of people. What are we actually achieving?
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. I'll do my best to answer those questions. Firstly, in relation to Leicestershire Promotions, the County Council provides no funding to Leicestershire Promotions. Neither does the City Council, as far as I know. The Leicestershire Promotions does have a relationship with some of the district councils. They have a contractual relationship. One of the things that came out of the review a few years ago was a decision not to continue funding Leicestershire Promotions and to put in place a new arrangement, and I described that earlier. But Leicestershire Promotions decided to continue in its own right to operate as a company operating in this area. But we had a productive and constructive discussions with them about respective roles. So I think at a very highest level, the place marketing team, the work that Mark leads, is very much working at a strategic level with Leicestershire Promotions operating at a more tactical level. And I think it's a good way of explaining that is reference was made earlier to Visit Britain, recognising the place marketing team as a destination management organisation. In fact, Visit Britain recognises both Leicestershire Promotions and the place marketing team as DMOs for Leicester and Leicestershire. But in doing that, they identify that the place marketing team leads on strategy, policy and place marketing, with Leicestershire Promotions leading on campaigns, tactical operations and bookable product. So that's how they describe it. And I think that's very much an outcome of the work that we have done with Leicestershire Promotions to make sure that the two organisations complement each other. Clearly they're a private company, it could decide to continue operating if they want to, but we wanted to make sure that the two organisations aren't competing with each other, that they're complementing with each other. One is leading on the more strategic side of things, with the other supporting that by delivering more tactical operations, sometimes working directly with a district council, but also with private sector organisations as well. On the funding, we did put significantly more funding into Leicestershire Promotions in the past than we are now putting into this place marketing team. So we have made substantial savings. The savings that were made last time round were intended to save, I think it was 175,000 in total. We have saved 100,000 of that on the tourism side in particular, but as the new arrangements sort of emerged and were put in place, we revisited that, and in the MTFS there was a decision made not to make the further £75,000 savings that were needed, because we wanted to maintain, we wanted to sort of strengthen the inward investment side and to ensure that the service was going to be effective. And I referred to the fact that there was less income generated than perhaps we'd anticipated at that time, and work is continuing through things like, for example, the membership model that Mark mentioned, to see if we can generate income which will help fund the service moving forward into the future. In terms of targets, I think that's been covered to some extent. We are developing a business plan, a 3-year business plan. There are going to be strategies put in place, a tourism growth strategy and a business tourism strategy, and within those we will be making sure that there are clear performance measures against which future progress can be measured.
Will a report be coming back in 12 months' time about how successful you've been?
We can revisit this in 12 months if you want, Mr. Bolton.
That would be
like to come back to it?
a very good idea.
Yeah. Okay, we'll put it on the planning agenda. Okay. Jonathan Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of questions. I was going to ask a similar sort of question to Rosita, actually, which was about do we record inward investment as far as whether it's in the county area or whether it's actually in the city area? And it'd be interesting to know. I know there's quite a few figures quoted on GVA, etc., as far as the relative investment values in the county versus the city, and I think that would be quite interesting to get a feel for where inward investment is actually going, because obviously that then supports other decisions as far as support for infrastructure, etc., and all sorts of other sort of investment decisions that have to sort of follow where the jobs are actually going. But so hopefully Rosita's question will sort of generate a bit of feedback, I think, hopefully to later meetings on that one. I was really going to ask a couple of other quick questions. So bids have been discussed, and also future High Street fund applications as well, and obviously correctly, they're not necessarily directly underneath certainly counties' strategic sort of area, but obviously county does support those particularly. So first question on the future High Street fund, just really making sure I know all the bids are sort of going in if they haven't already gone in already, and just making sure that actually county are supporting every single one of those within the area unconditionally. And the second is on the bids, and I know the Loughborough bid in particular that I sit on behalf of county, have recently been contacted by county to say that whether it's through resources or whatever, but I know Helen, for instance, won't be attending meetings in future, and I was just wondering how that support to the bids is now going to be directed, because clearly there's a huge amount that county in particular feed into the bids in relation to highways, if nothing else.
So the first one was the Future High Street Fund. Yep, they've all gone in, and yes, we've provided letters of support for all of them, and we will continue to work with them to develop those. So that's really positive. In terms of support for the bids, it is a little bit of capacity actually, because a significant amount of Helen's time is spent working on the market towns, and it's just, when we balance everything up that we have to do within our team, it's just too much of her time spent on that at the moment. So what we felt was that that was an area that she could step back from attending every meeting. She's more than happy, and any of us are more than happy to facilitate if there's a specific agenda item that requires a county council member to be there, we will be there. Helen meets regularly with the bids directly with the officers that run those, and the bids also attend the county-wide market town steering group, which Helen facilitates. In addition, I'm conscious that we have county council members attending all of those bids, and if any of those members that are attending feel that they're not receiving the required support, then we'd be more than happy to sit down with that member and ensure that they do, because clearly that is an absolute priority for us. Is that okay?
Right, Jonathan? Yep. Okay, Janice.
No, hang on. Alan,
He's coming. He's already spoken. You'll come in at the end. Janice.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, on a positive note, I've had many dealings with Helen Harris, who's attended the Hinkley Town Centre Partnership and the bid, and also attended many meetings at my own area in O'Shilton, and had a great many ideas to put towards the members, which have had come to fruition in the long term. But what I'm saying is, things are happening, and I know, like a lot of people probably on this committee haven't heard about them, but I've been involved with them, and there are positive signs coming forward, and a lot of help is given, but it's right in a way that not everybody knows how to get involved in it or know all about it. So that is an issue that it needs to be resolved. But a positive note on that anyway. Thank you, Chairman.
That sounds more like a positive comment rather than a question. Okay. Right. And then finally, Alan, you wanted to come back.
Just a number of questions have been raised since we've been talking. Just some points. What is our offer like? From an experience, I work in business, and I recently I do business with a business, a supplier who was in Leicestershire, Hinkley. They were expanding, but the offer from Warwickshire over the border was better than we offered, so they moved their factory. So the question is, how does our offer compare to the surrounding borders of other counties? How do we compare? So they moved, and so wasn't too bad for the staff, because it's only a matter of a mile or so over a border in that part of the county. So that's number one. So I'll be interested to how we stand up. I think it's nice visiting the cattle market. That's where I come from. But the truth of the matter of the cattle market is that sellers footfall is down for the simple reason, the reality is that slaughtering animals now is done more at the farm, and there is issues about the welfare of animals travelling them and other issues. So it's nice having a nice building and spending a lot of money on infrastructure, but that's not made a difference in the sense of what funds we're getting, because that's down, and I hope they explain that. So my concern is, like I said before, is the mix. What are we doing? What are we building? Will it work? And the final one is, I really get nervous about events. I go to a lot of events over the years. I come back, and then you ask the question, and it was mentioned here, what were the outcomes? Did anybody spend any money with us? Did they pick the phone up and come and visit us? And I think we have to really monitor events, because they can cost thousands, and yet they don't generate any interest at all. And we know that happens. They're nice jollies sometimes, nice to have a visit, nice to meet a lot of people. And there is different structures now. A lot of these events are changing, and I think we need to look at that, where they are a lot more precise and put you in touch with the direct people who are going to spend the money, instead of just having a stall where lots of people come along. So there's different ways of doing it, but I just feel we need to be very careful on the spend on events. Thank you.
Yep, thank you for that. In terms of how we compare, it depends really specifically on the sector and the ask of the business. But when you think about Leicester and Leicestershire as a location, it's very central, well connected. We've got 3 universities within 10k radius of one another, and probably a more plentiful supply of labour than certainly surrounding areas when you look at the statistics. The value or the cost of employing labour is slightly lower than the surrounding area, whether that's a positive or negative, depending on your point of view. There aren't so many grants available in this area, the Midlands area, as opposed to, say, in Wales or north of England. So we do struggle a little bit when it comes to financial assistance, although a number of the local authorities do provide support in relation to business rate relief, which is always a positive in relation to that. So there's a range of different factors that influence that decision-making process. I think we've put in place a warm welcome, a supportive welcome, but the challenge is always to be in a better position to compete with those inquiries that certainly come through that are less or more footloose, because a lot of the businesses we talk to have actually got a 20-mile radius that they're comfortable with potentially moving. Few have a footloose approach when they come to the UK. When it comes to events, I completely agree with the comment that's been raised. And since, as an example, the MIPIM one, we've got a whole host of work that's we're delivering in terms of meetings being arranged, continuation meetings, a whole load of work that's come out of that makes it very challenging in terms of managing the workload. And that's not just myself, it's other people, certainly within the public sector. I know John Bennett at the county is engaging with a number of the people that he made new contacts with. But also, it's not just about the public sector, it's about us enabling the private sector to generate their contacts and their business. And that's why, as part of Team Leicester, we've got a meeting it's next week, which is a recap with some of them about how they are leading and making sure that those initial contacts that they have developed are resulting in outcomes that are positive. One anecdotal evidence that came from last year's attendance, construction company in the Leicestershire area met someone new through contacts, through attending the MIPIM Property Conference last year, and currently they're on site with a £6.5 million housing scheme. So there are key outcomes that come forward, but the key is really for us to actually drive those forward and use it as a way of opening a door so that we can continue those engagements. And there's the third question, the one in the middle question, I can't quite recall it, sorry.
Oh, sorry, that wasn't cattle market. No.
Cattle market, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Given this very good cover this morning. Sorry? Thank you very much for coming. We would appreciate copies of those maps, and that would be very helpful to look at those, if you could leave those. I think it's been a useful session in understanding what you're doing. I think a lot of it's work in progress since the in-house team was set up. and perhaps you come back in a year's time and tell us how you've got on. Thank you. Right, if we could move on to item 9, please, which is the draft Youth Justice Strategic Plan. And we're joined by the Cabinet Lead Member Ivan Old, Paula Sumner, Assistant Director, Education and Early Help, Chris Thomas, Head of Service, Early Help and Safer Communities, and Carly Turner, Service Manager for Supporting Leicestershire Families South. What's that mean? You cover the south of the county, do you?
I've got a new job now. I'm Service Manager for Youth and Youth Justice as of last week.
Okay, right.
Thank you.
So you've come today to present the Youth Justice Plan, and who would like to kick off? Would you like to kick off, Chris?
Yes, yeah. I'll give panel members an overview of the actual plan and a bit of the background, and then obviously take questions from there. So each area is required to complete a youth justice plan. It's linked to the Youth Justice Board national funding that funds youth offending services across the country. So that's a bit of the background. There are links from the Youth Offending Service into partner agencies. So the Youth Offending Service is a team that has social workers and employees from the County Council, but also police officers, health workers. There are 2 or 3 health workers linked to the team, and also probation officer. So it's truly is a partnership team. And the plan that you see in front of you does involve consultation with partners, and that's something that's growing in terms of their input and influence over the plan. So the background to this is that the Youth Offending Service, which is the fulcrum of the Youth Justice Plan, is funded by, it has significant funding from partner agencies. And my first point is just by way of apology. The funding that you'll see on page 11 has actually got an error. The actual narrative on page 10 and 11 is correct. But in terms of the actual funding, the overall funding at the bottom is actually 2,635,820. If you see where you see the additional funding grid and then the YOS budget. And the reason for that is that the total that's the middle section of the additional funding is actually incorrectly being inserted there, and the only additional funding is impact, and some of the other funding there is now part of the core budget. So that I note that the template as well should read 1920 and not 1718. So the narrative's right. It was just that the table had a few errors in, just to put that straight. Going back to the background to the plan, the performance around youth justice, if you look at Leicestershire compared to most similar areas or the region or nationally, performance is very good. And I can point later to first-time entrants and figures of young people in custody. Again, some context, the Youth Offending Service is now within the Children and Family Wellbeing Service, which it was the Early Help Services. Just to give, again, members some context, that service altogether involved Children's Centre, the SLF, the Youth Offending Service and an assessment service, and there was about 270 staff. The Youth Offending Service has 107 staff, you'll see from the final part of the plan, which equates to about 65 full-time equivalent staff, just to give you context. In terms of, again, background information, the council MTFS and the Troubled Family Funding, which fund the SLF, that budget was reduced by 1.5 million overall of a 12 million budget. So that's some of the context that because the report goes in to talk about the 4 services coming together as one service in the whole family approach. So now the youth offending service is a part of a team with a lot of other early intervention services. So just quickly then, the plan covers a number of areas from practice development, governance, partner arrangements, resources and funding, future risks and service developments. And I just will touch on about 4 or 5 points from the report and then take questions. So pages 12, 13 and 14 talk about performance. Again, that I've mentioned this, the first time entrant performance in Leicestershire is really very good compared to partners, where there are 156 first time entrants per 100,000 young people in Leicester, and that compares to a most similar group as 206 per 100,000. And again, there's quite a lot of work that goes behind that, and that is there's good identification from the police in relation to young people that we need to work with. There's a liaison and diversion scheme with health that again picks out young people who may be struggling with behaviour early. And we have an impact team that I know I often get questions about, which is an outreach team of youth workers in local communities. So it's through that direction there's quite a strong prevention offer. Then in terms of performance, the low custody numbers have been for several years in Leicestershire. And again, if you're just looking at the stats, there are 0.009 per 10,000 young people in Leicestershire compared to, I think, regionally 0.14, and nationally the figure's a lot higher. And again, just what's behind those statistics of low numbers, and I think it equates at the moment to 2 young people from Leicestershire in custody, is the wraparound work that is a part of the plan that's done with the more high-risk young people, the work in court, and indeed the prevention work that actually stops the stem of young people at the prolific end of offending. So again, that's behind the performance. The challenge around the performance is around our young people at end of orders who are not in employment, education or training. That's the 16 to 18-year-olds, and the young people, the PMEs that are not the 16 and unders that are missing education. And again, the target there is 80% of the young people at the end of their orders in education, but there are the performance at the last year was around 63 or 4%, I believe. I'm not looking at the chart, but it was a slight fall from the year before. And I can talk in more detail about what's happening around education, and I'll take questions of that. But there's quite a lot of plans within the Youth Offending Service to address that issue. Some of the developments over the last 12 months have been around our health offer, linked to adverse childhood experiences. And again, just to highlight that I think on page 9 of the Youth Justice Plan, it talks about acquired childhood experiences, and that's actually a type and error. It's adverse childhood experiences. But over the last 12 months, the Youth Offending Service has got the services of a clinical psychologist and a CPN in relation to looking at the trauma-based approach to young people and improving the offer there. And in particular, I think members will be interested. It's the gap between CAM service with the really significant issues of mental health and emotional well-being that's increasingly facing young people, and the offer is increased. Another issue is that the Youth Offending Service was predominantly based at County Hall, with workers going out into communities to see families. Now, as the team has moved into youth justice within the integrated children and family wellbeing service, the workers have moved out and worked in localities with other family workers. So we have teams now in Charnwood, Hinckley, and working with other workers. There is a partnership focus within the plan. Page 16 talks extensively about the partnership work. One thing that I wanted to focus on, there's been quite a big focus in the last 12 months on child exploitation, and there's quite a lot of work in the partnership around the serious and organised crime strategy. Some of you have heard of this through county lines. The Youth Offending Services have been at the forefront of pushing for a strategy around exploitation, and not just child sexual exploitation. There's young people exploited in relation to other areas with vulnerable young people. So again, that's a part of the strategy at page 16. The team is also linked closely to the knife crime group that's coordinated by the police, and there are close links in the county to that group, and a lot of developing work in that area. But again, that is one of the challenges. Just moving on really finally, the practice development within the Youth Offending Service is outlined at pages 16 and 17, and there's a real big focus on desistance. And just in short, the desistance approach to young people is a strength-based approach. So it's looking at what young people are able to do, focusing on how you build their strength and confidence, and how you get them, young people who are involved in offending, integrated back into activities in the community. And a lot of the work, the development of the youth offending workers and with partners, is around this approach to working with young people. It's kind of really the background to wanting the Youth Offending Service workers to work with other family workers within the team. So my final point really would be about how the plan is developing. And again, I'm not quite sure of the page, but it's outlined working with partners that the Youth Offending Service is governed by a Youth Offending Service Management Board of partner agencies. But one of the things that the board have developed this year, really following along guidance from the YJB, is that being more challenging with partner agencies around reporting back into the Youth Offending Service Board about what they're doing to support youth justice issues in the Youth Offending Service. And you'll note in the report that there'll be reports from substance misuse providers, the police, CAMS and Public Health, and social care and education leads in relation to how they're going to impact in the next 12 months on some of the youth offending issues. And that's new because normally it was a partnership arrangement, but it has also, whilst there's a partnership arrangement there, it's also allowed a bit of a challenge conversation around as well what agencies are doing. So that's it in a nutshell. There's a lot in the plan, but I've tried to summarise some of the highlights, but happy to take questions.
Okay, I think that's a very comprehensive introduction. I think the service has always received strong support from this commission. It's a very important area dealing with some very difficult situations and young people, trying to take them away from crime. I think it's quite topical, the section you've put in on page 12 regarding the movement of and the dealing of drugs, serious and organised crime, violent crime, people trafficking and knife crime. Now, that's being talked about a lot at the moment, both nationally, and there's been quite a bit of criticism of funding and so on. So can you just say a bit more about how that's impacting on Leicestershire and what the service is finding? What are the key issues that we're facing there?
Yeah, I think in knife crimes there's increasingly within young people, certainly in certain areas, of carrying a knife because they feel unsafe if they don't. So that's the issue. It's not with a large cross section of young people, but a significant enough section to be problematic and needing a response from a number of agencies. And I think that the key to the issue around violent crime is that there needs to be a strong prevention strategy. So at the moment there is a strong strategy around identifying the young people who are engaged in that sort of activity, and there's lots and lots of work around that. But I think the developing work that for the future is working with health, schools and other areas to have a really strong prevention strategy around that. There is government funding that I know that through the PCC has been tapped into across, not just across the county, but across the LLR. So it is an area where there is a little bit of potential for growth in agencies, but it's focus of quite a lot of the partnership working around young people.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. Ivan, sorry, I omitted to ask as Cabinet Lead Member whether you wished to make any introduction before I started taking questions.
I'm quite happy to leave the report and answer any questions that are directed at me.
Can I just ask you to say also a bit more about page 8, where you talk about what happens when someone is on in custody or on post court supervision, and then you talk about the intensive support that person would receive. Could you say a bit more? Can I just give you an example of, I haven't come into contact a lot with the service, but I have recently, and I don't fully understand whose decisions are made, but this young person, and Mr. Old does know about it because I've corresponded, went on something of a crime spree in my area. He was then released on police bail and was released back into supported accommodation for 16 to 18-year-olds, where there was one person, one adult in that house. Now, who's involved in that decision to say that that's suitable support? Because what happened was he just went out and committed more crime. So when you say about trying to reduce reoffending, it seemed that one either slipped through the net or that didn't seem to be a factor. So I'm trying to get at, who is it that someone else is making that decision, where that young person, because it seems to me where they go immediately after they're released from custody is absolutely critical.
Yeah, so that decision would be made by normally the youth court, or there it could have been the Crown Court, depending on where the young person appeared. Clearly, they would be on, if they were on remand, they wouldn't have been convicted of an offence, so that would be an issue. But the court would look carefully at whether the young person should be in custody. What I can, though, give some context is that 5 years ago, there were probably around 1,250 young people in custody nationally. Now that figure's down to about 750. So there's far more reluctance for the court to actually use custody as an avenue for young people and look more at their circumstances. In terms of how a decision would be made, certainly if the Youth Offending Service had been working with the young person, then the Youth Offending Service worker would have provided some background to the court about the young person. Sometimes we deal with cases where the young person isn't being managed by the Youth Offending Service, so then we would send a worker at court to find some background to the young person and give that information to the court. So they'd very much look at what they thought was the best avenue in terms of remand or not, but just in the context of, I think that now putting young people in young offenders as institutes has become less of an
I'm not making the I'm not suggesting custodial centre we want to increase it. I'm saying where that doesn't happen and they're going somewhere else, back into the community effectively, and into a situation where they're either in the care of the local authority or they're in accommodation, private accommodation that has presumably been arranged by the local housing authority. Do we stipulate what support that young person needs? Do we assess that? Because just to release them into a semi-independent living accommodation, no qualifications of the person, they're just there to sort of keep an eye on the place. It just concerned me that no assessment had been done as to whether that was a suitable place. I'm not saying the alternative was to lock them up. I'm saying that if they're going to be put into the community, they need to have support.
Yeah, and that would be part of it in terms of the youth offender worker. If the young person was seen as really vulnerable and needing support, then we have 2 IRIS workers, but we've increased that number to 5 under our plan, who would provide that intensive support. So that we provide packages of support for up to 25 hours a week. So it's almost like daily visits to the young person. Also, I think, as well, if the person was vulnerable, not good at looking after themselves or quite suggestible to their peers, it may well be that young person, it would be suggested put in a warden-controlled situation. But without knowing the case, it's difficult to sort of speculate on how that would work. But certainly, for young people released into the community, we do have, they can be placed on a tag. There are packages of support that we offer, and we do have quite a strong offer around providing intensive and sometimes daily support to young people.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Terry Inan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report, and thank you for achieving such good outcomes in what appears to be quite difficult circumstances. Not that Leicestershire is particularly difficult. Demographically, one would expect this to be quite a good area, being mostly or largely rural, no big inner city deprivation to contend with. But what I look at that you seem to be contending with are your partners. And I have serious concerns about this, and they haven't changed. That is what is so disappointing. Page 34, or in your report 16, we've got complex cases being seen by the YOS frequently have multiple emotional health needs which sit below the CAMS threshold. I still despair. In 2008-9, we had an Improving Access to Psychological Therapies project, countrywide for adults. We were promised one for children. As far as I can see, this has never, ever happened. We still have a CAMS service that sees itself as Tier 4 and above. There is nothing below. And you have my sympathy, and I think it's coming to Ivan. I would be saying, well, what are we going to do about this? Because you can't do anything about this. This is making your lives difficult, and I'm sorry. And then also looking at the page 24, page 6 in your report, you also seem to be struggling against the grain with our schools, where fewer young people seem to be in full-time provision. Now, I do know that some comments that were made in this Scrutiny Commission by myself didn't go down well with some of the heads of our local academies, but I find that deeply worrying, because we know from reports nationally that it is children who are excluded from school are far more likely to end up recidivists in the criminal justice system long term. So again, I'm sorry that you're having to deal with this, and I'm really pleased that you're getting the outcomes you are despite it. But again, what are we going to do in order to challenge this situation that is only making it difficult for us?
Just on the CAMS thing, let's just be clear, that's a health responsibility, which you no doubt know. Which trust is it? Leicestershire Partnership runs CAMS. Yeah, I just think we ought to be clear when we're pointing the finger.
Right, this is where this is a national issue, and I think this is where it is beyond our staff to deal with this. The Improving Access to Psychological Therapy Service for adults provided a new set of providers at the tier 3 and below level of mental health provision. So in this area, it's run by Nottingham Healthcare Trust and was originally set up by Rethink in partnership with various organisations. That never, ever happened. So 10 years ago, we had that for adults and were promised something for children. It has never happened. I think that our public health department and school nurses try and pick up a lot of the pieces at that level, but there has never been that proper investment in young people's mental health below at the level below eligibility.
Right, but just for the record, it's a health function.
So it is a health function.
Chairman, I would draw the Commission's attention to page 23, where there is a record of the development of a strength and trauma-based model of working, and currently the service now has 0.8 FTE children's psychiatric nurse and clinical psychologist working with YOS staff. Now that may not be adequate, but it is a start. And I don't disagree with Dr. Einon's view that CAMS traditionally have seen themselves as operating at tier 4. We have recently, outside of this report, had a 17-year-old sectioned who CAMS had turned down, and within the first week of the sectioning they were told it was a CAMS issue, not acquired behaviour. So I'm quite comforted by the fact that on page 23, in that development of a strength and trauma-based model of working, that we've made a development to put right and give support to the more vulnerable.
Okay, thank you. Anything else to add? Yeah.
I think there, excuse me, I think there are a couple of valid points around the challenges that we face collectively with partners. I think the CAMS issue has always been a frustration amongst practitioners, but I think there are some developments, and from within ourselves, certainly in Chris's new service, we've got, whilst they are not medically trained practitioners, they are trained around well-being. So where children don't necessarily meet the threshold for CAMS, there is a service there, and we are working very closely with our colleagues in the clinical commissioning group. Met with them only just on Monday to talk about this very issue and what is available for children, but as well looking at some of the things around attachment and how that has affected a child as it goes through into their adolescent and adult years, are often those children who do end up in the youth justice system. So I think there's an acknowledgement, and you're right, it is a national issue that we're working certainly across the region with as well. And we're also, we've also started to have different conversations, if you like, with our partners in education settings more broadly around inclusion. Because when we say there are children who are not engaged in education, we need to understand why that is the case. And particularly for some of these children who are in the youth justice system, and what systems can we put in place to build some challenge into the very broad, when I say the education system, I mean everything, including alternative providers of education, employment and training, because that is also an issue for young people when they are either ending their licence in the youth justice system and trying to access employment opportunities. So supposed to try and offer some reassurance that those issues continue to be on our radar, and you're right, they are. But I think for me, certainly in my experience, it feels like we're at a point where we are beginning to make some significant progress, and there's an acknowledgement of that challenge around the earlier intervention, if you like, for young people who are displaying some behaviours that could potentially lead into offending behaviour. So hopefully that offers some reassurance.
Okay, so if they're excluded by the school or the education establishment for whatever reason, does the statutory responsibility then fall back? Is it still with the local authority to fine? And that's the NEAT, is it? It doesn't have to be school, does it? It could be training or anything under the NEAT, but that rests with the local authority.
It does, and it does have to be meaningful employment, education and training, so that, you know, we would obviously challenge some data around, you know, if a child is attending an hour a day, for example, that for some children may actually be a very productive hour and be meaningful. For other children, that it is not, and we wouldn't be counting that as being in employment, education or training. And we're very robust with our recording in Leicestershire. So the figures that you do see are a true reflection of the cohort rather than any kind of where we have, you know, they are in meaningful employment, education and training, and it can be with an alternative provider.
Managed moves, didn't we? Do we still have that, Ivan?
Managed moves. I could give you an example from yesterday, which is the 4th young person since Christmas who's now been moved at a cost of £8,000 per week. Now, anybody who looks at the medium-term financial strategy will know that the Children and Family Services Department is under constant pressure from the cost of making sure that people are safe. Yesterday's was within the context of child sexual exploitation. And the normal routes have been followed and they've all failed. Because under Human Rights Act, people are entitled to a mobile telephone. So you put somebody in Wilder, Staffordshire, and you end up with, as soon as they're with their new foster parents, they are phoning the people who have groomed them, who have more significance in their lives, who are putting them at risk of manipulation and exploitation, and they're off, they're missing. So I can assure you, when you talk about how did the young man who was put in supported accommodation get on, if it doesn't work, it will be changed. And it's the 4th conversation I've had with the director, as I say, since Christmas, where very costly weekly placements have had to be made in the best interests of the young person. And while I remain as lead member, we'll make the decisions in the needs and on the needs of the young person, and not with any financial accounting coming into it. Because if we don't meet those needs, that is somebody who is being exploited. But be aware, that's only the tip of the iceberg. These are the ones that we know about. There could be a significant number out there who we don't know about, who we find out about by default.
Okay, thank you. I think that's an interesting discussion in terms of understanding the difficulties. Right, Kevin Feltham.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of points. One's a typo, which in fact Councillor Old has already read the sentence on page 23 about the children's psychiatric nurse and clinical psychologist you've read. Actually, it says phycologist. Now, I actually know about phycology because in my undergraduate degree in microbiology, we studied phycology because phycology is actually the study of algae. And I wasn't aware that they had clinical phycologists. But anyway.
Was it an interesting degree?
Oh, I assure you, it covered lots of things. Microbiology does. But the real point I want to make really is relating to the partnership, obviously, and the management board. Great list of organisations. How do we liaise with the city? Because clearly youth doesn't stop at the border.
Yes, there is quite a lot of work. There's quite strong links between our head of service, our previous head of service, and now Carly with the city head of service. But in terms of work around knife crime, work around exploitation, that involves city and county. So we're because some of the agencies clearly work across the LLR. Please. Some of the health agencies straddle the two areas. So I think there's close links with the city. In relation to this area of work, it's not an area of tension in terms of working with the city.
Okay, Janice Richards.
Thank you, Chairman.
Ivan, did you want to comment on working with the city?
Well, I did, because the best example is the fact that Leicestershire Police, as a result of an initiative from this county council, have now got cutting-edge approach to child sexual exploitation. Some of you have heard the name Donna Smalley. Donna has managed the unit down at Wigston that involves the city. I've been privileged, and I'm not using that word lightly, to actually attend one of their weekly meetings. Every single child that they are aware of in the county and the city is listed as being a possibility for exploitation. Each child is looked at individually, up-to-date information is brought forward, and we have nurses present as well. So there is a straight link into the NHS, into the city, into the county, and the police force across the two. Scrutiny Commission should be really reassured by this process. Simon Cole, the Chief Constable, has said that Leicestershire is leading England in terms of what it's actually coordinating and delivering on that subject.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Janice.
Yeah, I've attended many meetings with Chris on the issues of drugs, which is a deep concern to me with young people and also older people. How do you associate the drug issues with the crime? How do you relate the two together? Is it because the drug issues are creating the knife issues? That is just the question. The trouble is, as well as I say, the courts tipping the young people back out onto the street, and this is why they continue. The police do a brilliant job. Panels that I've attended all do brilliant jobs, but when it comes down to the courts, my feeling is that they're tipping them back out on the streets, and they continue with the crime spree. On page 12, it's got extremely difficult to get young people to disengage once they're involved. And this is a really big issue, and I do feel that it doesn't always talk about it in great deal in the paperwork, but the drug issues, I see it in my area, but it probably doesn't always come to the police's notice. But I hear so much about it, and it does really, really worry me that they're leading down the path. And once they start on things like cannabis, then they go up to higher grades of drugs. And I do think it's a big issue for the whole of the country. And I think it's something that we must be deeply aware of. And I do say the good work that does go on, but they can't cope with everything. And I do think it's a major, major issue for all of us and for the whole of the country. Thank you, Chairman.
I don't know whether I've got this mic close enough. Can you? I've got quite a loud voice anyway, but I think.
Tell you from London.
Oh, I thought I'd covered it up really well as well. Yeah, tell me to slow down if I'm talking too quickly, especially when I'm talking about something I care about. And I think your point around the connection between drugs and crime is one that we are wholly aware of. I mean, I've obviously come from Merseyside, where we're probably seeing some of the manifestations of some of this considerably more than perhaps in other parts of the country. I've been incredibly impressed with the approach by not just the police but the partnership, but also I think where we've seen a shift change, and it is difficult to manage, and I appreciate it's difficult to manage in communities, is that these young, I think in this plan where we talk about it is incredibly difficult to encourage children, because they are children. I mean, I prefer not to refer to them as young people. They are children who are being exploited. What we are talking about now is how we prevent them getting into that kind of environment in the first place. And some of that does link back to challenging exclusions, because once you're excluded from provision, you immediately become at risk. You will know all the things about your geography, where you live, some of what your family support network is or was when you were younger. So I think that point is really critical, and what I think the Youth Offending Service and the much broader wellbeing service that we have got the incredible benefit of, believe me, this is a real asset, is that we can look at a different approach to those young people rather than potentially custody, and because we know that custody, particularly long-term custodial sentences for children, do not have the desired effect on their reoffending rates. So there's that element to it, of it, and actually what the police's focus is not to, for want of a better phrase, the young people potentially in the past were the low-hanging fruit in terms of, well, we know that they're the ones on the bikes going around the communities with the drugs. It's easy to get them, to catch them and put them in custody. Actually, not in all cases, but in a majority of cases, they are the victim of exploitation. Now, the police's focus is very much on the higher end, in terms of organised crime groups who are exploiting those young people. So I think we've got a shift change in the way in which we approach the whole dynamic. And drugs are a commodity. So the minute, it's almost like shark's teeth, really. The minute you take a load of drugs off the street, there will be either more drugs or another commodity of value. So we've always got to be ahead of the game, if you like. That, although, is very difficult to communicate and manage in communities. And again, I think that's some of the work the community safety partnerships can get involved in terms of managing some of those community cohesion issues as well. So hopefully that reassures you of our position of
Janice has spoken to me about her concerns in the past, and I think they're very valid. I think she's right to raise them. But I would hope members of the Commission would read page 12 and gain some confidence from it. If you look at the second paragraph down, the performance of our service, 16th nationally, 24% lower than the family average group, and within the top 20% of services in relation to custody rates. You would expect me to draw attention to success, but actually often what we focus on is problem and failure, and we forget to actually acknowledge the way that the service has worked on behalf of young people who have offended. What I'm particularly pleased with in this report on this particular page is the insight which is shown by the officers. The data indicates that the BAME offend less frequently, but are 15% more likely to reoffend, which is a concern. Now, when officers have got that degree of knowledge, there's very clear analysis taking place and focusing of efforts on what they need to do. And further down, and Jonathan, this isn't to give you a heart attack, Loughborough is the area of most concern. And I'm not at liberty to tell you the information. When I chaired the Safer Community Strategy Board, we had a presentation by Superintendent O'Neill on county lines penetration into the county of Leicestershire. All the handouts were taken back at the end because it is so confidential. Clearly the police are very active in this respect, and clearly there could be, if there was a similar operation to the one that took place in Norfolk in January of this year, which resulted in 170 arrests, there could be a skew to all of the figures in the next report that you actually read. But that isn't something that we control. But I do, and I would finish by saying to you, on that final paragraph, young people's involvement in the movement of and dealing drugs for organised crime and serious violent crime is now a significant issue for Leicestershire. The young people who the gangs target are those who are in care, those who are part-time education, those who hang around truanting from school, anybody who is vulnerable. In other words, a less able person. I'm sure you've all heard of the term cuckooing. In essence, what that means is that somebody who may be vulnerable has given over their place of residence to a gang to operate from, usually under fear that they're going to be beaten up or tortured or whatever the case may be. When you read the report, and I've read it thoroughly, although I must admit I missed the acquired word, which should have been adverse, and I apologise for that. It gives me really good insight. It helps us to focus the resources that we've got down to where they are, and it would be wrong of me to say, not to say, that without the localities, the districts and the borough councils' involvement through the locality partnerships, I don't think we could be as effective on behalf of young people as we actually are at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got Alan.
Thanks for that. Really enjoyed the report. To me, just quickly, it's early intervention, getting them at 3, 4, 5 years of age. I don't have to tell you that. That's crucial, and I think that's a focus. My concern is, I think Terry said it adequately and other people, is this exclusion from schools. I've worked in the field many years ago. I've worked in prisons. I'm gobsmacked how many of these people with ADHD, all sorts of different sort of mild disabilities, and it concerns me greatly that it's so easy to exclude. I've been chair of governors of a school with a special unit where they send them. We've got league tables. I don't know whether they're good or bad, but so there is an issue there, and I'm sure Ivan agrees that the system doesn't support what we're trying to do, and we have to challenge it, and I will constantly challenge it. And when I have to sit here when people who run schools and some of these academies say that doesn't happen, well, I'm afraid to say I'll challenge that, because it does. I've seen it firsthand constantly, where children with issues are being excluded, and then we end up trying to solve the problems, and they go further, as you've said there. So I do think I commend the work. I think but we've really got to look at the structure in the future. Hopefully we can.
You mean by the structure?
Well, first of all, the structure of schools being allowed to exclude.
I thought that's
what I'm saying is, but there isn't also a structure. I know we also have a system where, I know it sounds great, where parents can choose any school, but that affects transport sometimes, and affects what areas they go to or where they go. I think we need to look at the whole issue, how we best support, but I don't think any child should be excluded unless it's the last gasp. So that's not the case.
Okay, so the position is that in the end, the local authority cannot require the academy to accept a child, and the local government commission association has asked the government to reconsider that, to change the act, and the government has so far not indicated a willingness to do so.
Well, we need to challenge it continually.
No, I agree with you entirely. It's a major issue that we have a statutory responsibility to deal with these young people, as we do for every young person, to find them a good school place, I think is the word. And in the end, we have one hand tied behind our back when it comes to actually delivering it. And if we can speak together as one voice for challenging that, I'm 100% with you, Alan.
Again, I've done a number of years ago, I did some work in Glenparva. I was absolutely shocked at the amount of young people with mild disabilities, confidence problems, mental health issues, which we're supposed to be caring about, that are being excluded and then end up offending and end up getting into trouble and and once again, passionately, custodial services that don't work. In fact, they're the last thing we should think about, because they don't work. Prisons don't work. We've got to look at other ways of handling this issue. And it is early intervention, but also new structures and rules, so it makes it a lot more difficult to dump people. Simple as that.
Okay, do you want to come back on?
I would, because I think that you've got to put all of this in context. And if you look at what we have locally, you start with the Supporting Leicestershire Families programme, which picks up from the district and borough councils families that are worried about where they meet the criteria, we're able to intervene. Terry will say, quite rightly, the criteria may be set higher than actually all needs are, and obviously that's debatable. We have just had an incredible response to an appeal for academies as well as maintained schools to be prepared to develop specialist on-site facilities for young people with special educational needs. I find it quite overwhelming, but not surprising, because at secondary level we have throughout the county currently being bought into by all of the academy trust boards, the exclusion partnerships, where they will move heaven and earth to avoid the situation where somebody has to go. Now, it can go wrong. You all know that we've got over 600 children located in the county by other local authorities in care of those local authorities. So there is nothing that anybody can do. If a child, as happened at one of our secondary schools, turns up, placed by Liverpool, who didn't tell the school that the person was a school phobic. And the school spent 3 days trying to get this young man into school without adequate information. And that just did not work. And one of my most difficult problems is knowing when the newspaper or the media refers to children in care, or the police talk about missing children, are they actually children that you and I are all accountable for? Because at the moment they don't seem to be able to distinguish between the 588 that we've got in care and the over 600 placed in the authority by other authorities who go missing and also have social problems. But the school side, if we could replicate something at primary level to what we've got at secondary level, and that is the gap, that is the challenge for us, to try and get partnerships that could work at primary level. It's very difficult when you've got some schools of 600 and other schools of 30.
Okay, anything to add? No? Right, Rosita, I'm going to give the last word to you.
Oh, thank you. Ivan, thank you for thoroughly depressing me. Every year we get this report and I'm thoroughly impressed how well we manage the situation considering the circumstances. But I always think it is really, really frightening, and it is the importance of this report really, where we understand the difficulties you as officers have and the difficulties which are also in the system. I get very, very, I think it's complicating and confusing. Now, when it comes back next time, I wonder if we could have some case studies to see how it all fits together, you know, because next time, of course, we will see how the early years will work. We also see, because you said in the report, there's a bigger emphasis on prevention. So I think if we could have a few case studies to see how it all works together, where there are gaps, because every case is individual, nothing ever fits a criteria. So, for instance, for a layman, and I'd just like to account it, we've got in this report 21 acronyms. You know, from and sometimes no explanation, so that would probably help as well. But the issue is, if we see where you have got gaps, where we can help, because it would be really good for the Scrutiny Commission to say, you know, could we look at X, Y, and Z where we can support our officers, where we could possibly change and look at a different approach. So that's number one. The other thing is, Ivan wrote a very good letter to the minister recently. Maybe Ivan could write another letter and point these issues out, because at the end of the day, like Simon said, we're fully behind you. But if we don't raise these things publicly and loud enough, I mean, he can always tell us to go away, but I do think we ought to point that out and hold our ministers responsible, because these issues aren't going away. And my third point, it is in relation to your risk register. And I think it wants to be a little wider and put inhibitors into that as well, because we've mentioned an awful lot of inhibitors earlier on. We talked about CAMS, we talked about the academy, we talked about weekly costing things, the disengagement. And if that was to be listed, surely those things would raise a higher profile, and then we can look how we measure up against it and what we can do. And I'm very happy to have a response on my suggestions from you, but I think I've seen a lot of nods, so I think all members seem to be very much in agreement.
Okay, I suspect the format of this plan is pretty prescribed, but what you're suggesting is that in addition to that, there is a separate report with a couple of case studies that have, how should we put it, occupied a lot of your time in the previous 12 months. Is that something that wouldn't be too difficult to do?
I think that would be useful, but not necessarily just always around where there are gaps, but where we've had significant successes with young people, where the system does work for young people, because our reoffending rates in Leicestershire are good, so we are doing something right, but also evidence of where we've intervened early and have had the benefit of good, strong prevention services that, again, not every area has the benefit of that, and their FTE numbers and their referral rates will be, reoffending rate, social care has on there, reoffending rate will be considerably higher. So I think we can evidence where the system does support young people as well as where some of those gaps are. And again, around the dependencies in terms of the risk register that you referred to, again, that the format of the report is prescriptive. You will see from the covering report that the Youth Justice Board are looking to change that, and I'm sure they'll consult on that. And we would be happy to make some of those comments to them about could we have a bit more flexibility around what those risks depend on in terms of other partners or other blockages in the broader system. So those are valid points, and thank you for that.
Right, Chris, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to add a point really, just on what Paul has said about building on strengths, and I think listen to the debate really with interest. And there's I mentioned assistance at the start of this, is the fulcrum, pushing the youth workers out, working with young people, and the 8 cornerstones of assistance are these. And I think, you know, if you think about these and the priorities in which the youth is going, so the cornerstones are building relationships for young people, active management of diversity, removing structural barriers, integrating young people into the community, identity and self-worth of the young person, using restorative approaches, engaging young people in the wider context, and changing the way that young people participate with other young people and other people. So that's a cornerstone, I think, of what we're trying to do through that early intervention approach. And again, whilst there's clearly problems that we've highlighted, you know, if we did do a case study, I'd also want to highlight some of the strength base, because the investment in for me as head of early help and intervention, the investment in early intervention in Leicestershire is something I obviously welcome, given my role.
May I just come back on that, Chris? But I think that is where there is an importance of having case studies, one that works, one that doesn't work, because you have those words, we have statistics, but we have got no numbers. And how we got to see it is we got to visualize it and see it in realities where the weaknesses are, because words do not have a necessary outcome. And that is why I think it would be really good for us members to understand. And is there, while I mention it, is there a way we can have numbers rather than percentages at one point? Because all the report is percentages and it doesn't log.
Again, that is how we're required to report to the Youth Justice Board, because it's per 1,000 population. And the reason why they do that is in order to compare and identify. But there are some areas that we will want to know whether the actual volume is of concern, and perhaps we can be a bit more explicit about some of that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to give the last word to Ivan.
I wanted to say to you, Chair, and I don't know if it's your remit as the Commission or the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny, at some stage in the future you're going to want to know how the amalgamation of the 4 services together is working. It's a much more coherent system. and obviously youth justice is part of that, but youth justice is complemented by the supporting Leicestershire families, is complemented by the work that we do with schools to reduce exclusions and to maintain the possibility of keeping people in line. So I would just leave that with you. That's be your determination as to where that has to be taken up.
Okay, I mean, I think we've strayed well outside youth justice with some of the discussions, although it's all absolutely inextricably linked. But the role here is definitely youth justice and community safety, safety communities. We're the statutory committee for that. So Rosemary advises that the correct place for that to go is children and families. But I think you're absolutely right, and as commissioners, we'll make sure that does happen. Thank you, and thank you very much for coming this morning and for the discussion. Can I just remind members that the next meeting is on the 12th of June. Thank you. I'll close the meeting.